Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, good evening. This is Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments, episode number 37, I believe it is, entitled Only 11 Matter. And as we've seen before, titles make absolutely no sense at this point in this podcast, but hopefully by the time it's over, you'll get it anyway. You know, it's funny, this podcast is kind of based on memories that I have, and I'm always a little amazed at the things that trigger these memories from my past. Not to say that I can remember anything, of recent vintage. That seems to be my problem these days. But sometimes, I'll do something, or someone will tell me something, or I'll read something, and it just triggers a very vivid memory from my past. And this one is probably no exception. And it kind of involves the idea. I was reading my Bible recently. I've been trying to do a better job of studying the scripture, God's word. And, have you ever read a Bible passage and suddenly your mind just kind of takes a hard left, straight into a memory that you haven't thought about in, maybe decades? Well, that happened to me this week. And I was reading in the book of Deuteronomy, one of those, some people consider a very exciting book. It actually is a pretty good book. You need to spend some time there though. And, but I was reading about Joshua and Caleb. And if you don't remember them, these were two of the Israelites as Moses was leading them from Egypt to the promised land. And they had been, wandering through the area there, trying to get to the promised land initially. And then when they finally arrived, Joshua and Caleb and 10 other men who were, I guess you would consider spies, like 007, were charged with going over and doing some reconnaissance there into the promised land. And it was kind of a mission that they were sent on by Moses to kind of check out where it was they were going and just see exactly what kind of resistance they were going to have. Because if you know the story, you know that the land was occupied by a number of tribes, we'll call them. They were, probably large families, towns that had been built up around these what would you call it? Their existence there in what God was saying was the promised land, what He promised to Abraham back years earlier than this particular time frame in the Bible. And so, consequently, they were sent out to say, okay, what are we going to run into? Let's do a little recon mission and come back, with a report to Moses and the rest of the men there waiting to cross the Jordan River into the promised land. And so, as it turns out, they went, and then they came back. And Joshua and Caleb had a little different opinion than the other 10. In fact, they said the land is beautiful. And yes, there are giants, but, it's doable. And that was essentially what they reported back. Now, the problem was the other 10 spies. You see, they saw the land, same land as Joshua and Caleb, and they saw the same people. And yes, there were giants there, and they were pretty much frozen in their response to Moses, because essentially they said, hey, it's impossible, man. These guys, they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof. Not to quote the song, but I guess I just did. And so consequently, there was a split message there, and unfortunately for them, fear won, and faith in God's promise lost the vote. And because of that, an entire generation, everyone over the age of 20, the Bible tells us, was denied entry into the promised land, including Moses, but only Joshua and Caleb were allowed to cross into the promised land when they had finished their wandering in the wilderness, while essentially they were waiting for those that had little faith to die off, and only their descendants would be taking occupation of this land. And so Joshua and Caleb were the ones that were allowed to go forward and bring them into the promised land. Well, that's about the time my mind jumped completely off track, and I started having flashbacks to a memory that I had about a football field in Montgomery, Alabama. Now let me set the scene for you here. It was the fall of 1968, and those of you who grew up in Fairfield, you may remember this little episode that was going on. We were getting ready on the football team, that is, to prepare to go to Montgomery, and we were going to play Jefferson Davis High School. It was a brand new high school in Montgomery, and this was their first season, if I recall, that they would be playing football, and they were considered what was called a 4A school, as opposed to we were a 3A school. We were a smaller high school. And so we consequently played, a few 3A schools. There weren't really many in close proximity to our high school, so the majority of our schedule was actually 4A schools, but this was one more. And so this was Fairfield High School versus Jefferson Davis High School of Montgomery. And believe it or not, the game was to be played at Cramton Bowl. I mean, this was a real live football arena. This wasn't, I won't say that ours was a rinky-dink arena, but it was probably 50, 60 years old. It sat probably, I don't know, maybe 2,000 people on a full night on the home side, and the visitor stands probably sat around 12. They were kind of rickety and, made of wood, and more than 12, but I'm being a little exaggerative there. But the game was supposed to be played, and it was played at Cramton Bowl, a real football stadium, an arena. And kind of for us, it felt like, going to the promised land. First tie-in. Now, as I said, we were a small 3A school, small stadium back home, and walking into Cramton Bowl felt like we had arrived. I mean, we were undefeated at the time. It was pretty early in the season, though. And, it was a night game. And so we were mesmerized by, the bright lights and the big stands, the big arenas, the big seating areas, and really and truly just the big time atmosphere of what was going on in this stadium and what we were about to run into. And we were warming up on our end of the field, and we probably dressed about 35 guys, maybe 36, that actually came to Montgomery on the bus with us. That was our travel. It wasn't a travel squad. That was the entire team. It's about 35 or 36 players. And then Jefferson Davis came out. It was called Jeff Davis. They came out. And they kept coming out. And they kept coming out. And deja vu, they kept coming out. And here's the deal. We felt like, it looked like and there must have been 95, maybe 100 players dressed and ready to play for that team. And as I said earlier, they were a 4A school, so they had a bigger pool of players to pick from, and it looked to me like they had dressed the entire student body. But honestly, it didn't seem to matter, I guess, to whoever scheduled that game. We were going to play them. And then we noticed the uniforms. They were green and gold. They were the home team. They had yellow helmets, and that JD logo kind of looked an awful lot like the Green Bay Packers. Now they weren't giants, but the number of them, that was the part that was intimidating. And in reality, we probably took up about 15 or 20 yards of the field, warming up, and they took up probably about half of the field when they spread out to do their calisthenics. And right about then, reality started creeping in to our minds. I remember it. I remember it well. It was a fear. We were undefeated playing a larger high school, and we were playing in Cramton Bowl away from home, and this may not be good. And that's when a coach's word was kind of the turning point. You see, we had an assistant coach. His name was Jimmy Fuller. He was actually an alumni of Fairfield High School. He was all-state. He was a fantastic player. This was his first year in a coaching job following his graduation from the university. He was a former standout at the university. Bear Bryant called him one of the best linemen that had ever stepped on the field for Alabama. This was before John Hanna showed up. He was on the teams that won back-to-back national championships. And he was a man that knew what pressure looked like. And he called us all in to a huddle, all 35 of us. And he wanted to say a word. And Coach Lutz said, "Please do." And he pulled us into the end zone, and he said, "Guys, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." And here's what he told us. He said, yes, they've got more players. And yes, they look impressive. But Jeff Davis can only put 11 men on the field at one time. And so can we. And that just hit us like a lightning bolt. We weren't playing 100 guys. We weren't playing to be who was the best dressed on the field that night. We were playing our game in a strange city and in a strange town, and suddenly our mindset completely changed. We had what I look back now and say was a Joshua and Caleb moment. That was our Joshua and Caleb moment. We didn't care how many there were standing on the sideline. We believed our 11 was better than their 11. And faith replaced fear. And then the game started. And that's when we realized something else was going to happen as well. We weren't just playing Jeff Davis. We were playing the governor of Alabama and apparently every referee and official on the field. The flags were flying constantly that night. And I even got penalized that night for not wearing a mouthpiece. And I'm not even sure that it was a requirement to have a mouthpiece back then, but apparently it was, because I got a 5-yard penalty because I didn't have my mouthpiece in. I don't know what it did. I probably swallowed it. Not really. But it was kind of aggravating to wear. But I got the penalty. Why? because I guess it was a way of, well, I shouldn't say that. We kind of thought they were a little one-sided on their calls. Well, call this section Faith Rewarded because the final score, it was Fairfield 42, Jeff Davis 7. And I may be off a point or two. I can check it, let you know later. But I'll check, in fact, I'll check the records and we'll see I'll put it in the comments after this is over with. But, here's the kicker. We had more yards in penalties than they had in total offense. Now, listen to what I'm saying again. Their running and passing yardage total together for the night was smaller than our penalties that we were charged. I don't remember the exact number, but it was well over 100, maybe 150 yards of penalties that night. It was a long night, but at the end of the day, it was a glorious evening because we knew, we realized something by the end of that game. And what was that? Well, we had the best 11. We didn't care about the Giants. We didn't care about the uniforms. We didn't care about the quantity of players that they had. We had the best 11 that we put on the field. As I was preparing for this podcast, the phrase film, faith, and false perception kind of jumped into my mind because there's another layer I wanted to add on to this if we could for a few more moments. We had watched the film on Jefferson Davis, and we always watch the film before you actually play the game. So we had gotten their films and they had gotten ours. And so we were watching the film, prepping for them and trying to determine what, tendencies they had. It's a common thing in football. It's called a scouting report. But back in those days, before the days of videotape and instant replay and rewind it and play it back, our film was black and white, and it was on an old 16 millimeter projector that you could run forward and backwards. But it was it was common for the day. Black and white film, and the camera, one camera, not a drone in the sky, but one camera up in the press box or above the press box, way up in the stands, kind of grainy, kind of flat. And you really couldn't tell a lot about the size of the players when you're that far away. And, you couldn't tell, a whole lot, or you didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what was standing on the sideline. You were only looking at those that were on the field. But on film, they looked good. I don't know what their win-loss record was at that point. Don't know. I could probably look it up. I may put that in the comment later as well. But they didn't look better than us, and that's what we were banking on. And that's a lesson right there if you think about it. Sometimes our fears are fed by bad information, bad reconnaissance, kind of like a Minority Report. There were only 2 people saying we could do it, and 10 said that they couldn't. And so distance, how shall I say this? There's a lesson. Fear is fed by bad information and distance. They were a long way away from us. In fact, I remember going down there on a bus and never really knowing, what this school was all about. It was a brand new school. There wasn't much history on them to know whether they were good or bad, unlike, the Shades Valleys and the Jones Valleys and the Huey Towns and, the Miners and the McAdories that we typically played. So sometimes fear is fed by bad information. And I guess if there's let's call it a devotional summary to this whole podcast, it was this: Joshua and Caleb weren't focused on the giants. They were focused on God's promise. They didn't deny the challenge. They denied the power that fear sometimes has on us. And here's the truth. It's not about the size of your enemy. It's about the strength of your God. It's not about how many are lined up against you. It's about who stands with you. God never promised the absence of opposition. There's always going to be opposition. You know it. I know it. It's always going to be true. But he did promise victory through faithfulness. And sometimes all you need to remember is this: the other side may look overwhelming, but they can only put 11 on the field at one time. And with God on your side, that's more than enough. Listen, I appreciate you tuning in tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast and you'll take the message to heart. I know that I'm coming to a point where I enjoy doing these podcasts, and I will continue to do them as long as I can remember the stories. I don't know how long this is going to persist, but I think this was episode 37. So we'll see. But I do appreciate your support. If you would, tell your friends about us and invite them to also join in. And be sure and like the podcast and subscribe if you would. It kind of helps my algorithm on YouTube and Facebook, where people can find me a little easier, as opposed to just stumbling across the situation here. But if you would, take a brief moment and listen to this guy that's coming up, because he's got some good information for you. And again, I love you all, and I appreciate you looking in on us tonight. And I hope you have a great week. And remember, the giants are only in your head. God is on your side. You take care. Good night. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.